We're going to be focusing in on a key term, landform denudation. Landform denudation essentially is any process that wears away or changes landforms. Beforehand, we talked about processes that create landforms, that build them up. Now we're going to be talking about things and processes that wear away or change landforms. And these begin with weathering, which mass movement, which we won't really talk about here because in Indiana we don't really have this as big of an issue because mass movements, think of it as landslides. It's going to be more of a key issue out west and where places where you have steeper slopes, mountainous areas, what have you. But in Indiana we really don't have much of a mass movement issue. But erosion, we're going to look at the various processes of erosion, essentially the removal of sediment, the removal of Earth's surface material, and of course that removal, that sediment has to be moved somewhere else, transportation, and eventually that sediment, that process that moved and transported that sediment eventually is going to leave it, lay it down, and we call that deposition. Now we defined weathering. Weathering is the disintegration of rock exposed at the surface due to atmospheric influences. This is not erosion, this is not transportation. This is essentially the breaking down of rock so that it can then be transported by the various processes that we'll talk about later in videos. This is not the transportation of this weathered away material. Transportation, that's going to be erosion, gravity, or the various transportation agents we'll talk about a little bit later on. So that's going down. That's in the future. We'll talk more about that stuff later. But in terms of weathering, I'll come back to those key terms I talked about right at the beginning. Bedrock is the parent rock from which weathered regolith or broken up rock and soil develop. One thing to know is bedrock varies from place to place. The regolith is then subsequently going to vary from place to place. And so some rock is sturdy rock. Some rock is like the Chuck Norris of rock. It's hard to break it down. Where others are a little bit more softer, a little bit more capable of being broken down and weathered away. So we think about the underlying bedrock. It depends. As far as the rate of weathering is going to be contingent on the atmospheric influences as well. So we can think about weathering being influenced by the climate, the water table, slope, the underlying bedrock. Is it hard? Is it soft? Is it being capable of being broken down with water? Is it not? All of these ideas, all of these, regarding weathering, all of these potentials are based on the characteristics of the underlying bedrock. There's two main types of weathering. They are physical weathering and chemical weathering, both of which we'll talk about in sections. Typically, although they're two separate things, typically they work hand in hand together to help break down our underlying bedrock and regolith.